This is Bob Rourke with Business Leaders Podcast, and today our guest is Dr. Steve Long. He's the founder and president of Motere Consulting here in Colorado Springs. Steve, thank you so much for taking time to come by and be a guest on the show.
Oh, my pleasure, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. If we could, tell us a bit about your business and who you serve.
All right, so I'm like you said, I'm the president and founder of Motere Consulting, which is a performance enhancement firm that helps manage risk, preserve capital, and enhance value through management development and management assessment services. So I built a predictive model of human performance and leadership while I served as the head of performance psychology in the Human Performance Lab at the Air Force Academy. And the model has been successfully applied to business, athletic, academic, military, and artistic performance. And my business clients average 115% improvement in financial performance on average with a zero failure rate. So basically, it's a data company.
You know, I think about for the business owner that's listening, you go, well, I could do with 115% improvement on pretty much anything at any time. So if I'm that business customer and I go, I'm going, what is it that I should expect if I hire you to come in and evaluate my leadership team and my company? What should they expect?
You're going to learn things that you don't know about them. And basically what the behavioral analyses do is it's a shortcut mechanism is that particularly with the clients I serve, what they find out in 2 to 3 weeks would normally take them 2 to 3 years to find out. And only they find out under dire circumstances.
Okay, so I'm your prospective new client, and I'm getting ready to do whatever I'm trying to do. I hire, and you come through the door. What time frame should I expect, and what kind of steps do you take to go through and arrive at a conclusion?
So there's two elements. There's the management assessment component and the management development component. And the management assessment component is what I'm doing there is I'm measuring the behavioral factors of strategic execution. And strategic execution is simply the ability to execute the strategy. Okay, and so there are some strategies that are better than others, and there are some managers who execute strategy better than others. But when you put a good strategy with a really good manager, that's when you really blow the doors off.
And so you have the visionary versus the operational person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you can combine the two. I don't do anything with strategy. All my degrees are in education. You know, that's for the MBAs to determine as far as what to do. But what research has found is that strategies only deliver 63% of what they promise. So let's say you got a proposal for $100 million. Right? Well, just lop that. Just lop 30 to 40% off right from the start, because at best they're only going to get 60 to 70 million. But then you combine the inability to execute strategy, and then it goes down significantly. And this is where people don't understand as far as what they should do. And because it's what I call the strategy execution paradox. So when things go south, how do you know what's at fault?
Which lever? Exactly.
So if it's the strategy, right? Well, how do you know? Because there are strategies out there that Jack Welch couldn't execute. Okay, but then there are people who screw up the best strategy possible. They simply don't have the execution skills to pull it off. And what my behavioral analysis do is basically empower my clients to determine which lever to pull.
We were talking a little bit beforehand about case studies.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some examples, whether it's an individual that's trying to come in and buy a company, or whether it's a new business owner or an HR department trying to evaluate a company. And you had some case studies. Maybe talking about a case study would paint a picture in the mind of the listener.
Let's see. I would think there was probably one of the better ones is in succession planning.
Mm-hmm.
is I was engaged to work with a candidate for a CEO position of a $300 million ESOP. And the current CEO was charged with identifying 3 external candidates and 3 internal candidates. And to be honest, because it was an ESOP, chances were they were going to go with an internal candidate. He was he was highly regarded in the company, obviously because he was he was a candidate. He had a seat on the board, but sometimes having a seat on the board, and a lot of CEOs out there will understand this if they had some maybe not conflicts, but some rough waters with their board, is that sometimes familiarity breeds contempt, and so the board was not really interested in him as a candidate. He was 3rd out of 3. And a distant 3rd out of that. So we ran the behavioral analysis, found out the strengths, weaknesses, tendencies, blind spots, and we just worked on a few issues. And not only did he become a better leader, but he actually started doing his job a whole lot better. And so he was offered the job, and that's a good thing, right? But it goes more than that. Because once he was offered the job, then he grew the company from 300 million to 400 million, expanded the borders, went to the international, grew it to Europe, grew it to Canada, grew it to Australia, and grew the company by 25%. They would have never have predicted that, never. So the analyses, are serviced as 2 different things. One, it helps identify risk factors, but also it provides data to establish a learning plan.
When you talk about the risk factors, so in this instance, what risk factors did you identify?
Impulse control.
Okay.
Is that he would just spout off in a board meeting about whatever came into his head. So I gave him a tool, and he actually brought the tool into the board meetings, and he would just have it on a piece of paper, and then he just went by it, and he actually, transformed right in front of their eyes. Is that he became a different person, became a different leader, and they started seeing him in a different way.
What was, for him, I'm sure as, if it's from here to here, your impulse on your commentary, what was the transformation in him when he started using the tool and the recognition factor that he had that it made a difference?
Well, see, that's what when I give a keynote, I say I have a magic trick. Okay?
Did you bring it?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I got it. Right? Is that I improve performance by talking to people. And you talk to business leaders all the time, right? And you talk about the costs as far as whether it's IT or cultural transformation, right? And what kind of investment they have to make, and then see what kind of comes on the backside of that. I just talk to people. No chairs have to be moved. No desks have to be moved. Right? You don't have to get IT involved. Right? Performance improves just by me talking to them and they talking to me, right? Because they change how they think about things, they change how they perceive the situation, and they actually see the situation with greater reality.
That must be an interesting conversational technique to go into a disparate group of skill sets in a company and different past agendas. Mm-hmm. To be able to go in, and do you interview them in group setting, or do you interview these people in individually?
Yeah.
What's the typical time frame for an interview like that?
Well, it's not really an interview. Once they supply the data, I aggregate it and then generate the behavioral analyses.
Okay.
And then I go over the behavioral analyses with them, show them what they're good at, what they're bad at, and then from that point on, it's really up to them. They have full control. Mm-hmm. So they dictate the pace, they dictate the direction. So if they want to start out with strengths, okay. If they want to start out with weaknesses, okay. But if they're not really, if they want me to take the wheel, then I take the wheel, and I say, okay, this is where we're going to start. Mm-hmm. So, they're in control, but the model that I built consists primarily of two things: is the assessments, and then the development aspect. The assessments are comprised of the psychological inventories and the behavioral analysis, and it's really important to understand this, particularly for the people listening to this podcast, is that the biggest problem I have, Bob, right, in my business is following people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. And there's a lot of them in my business. Okay? So, when it comes to psychological inventories, the first thing that I ask about, right, is it valid? Is it reliable? Okay? Because if it's not, those tests aren't worth anything.
Yeah.
Okay? They're not worth this
anything.
Paper right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? And so I'm sure you've heard of Myers-Briggs. Doesn't meet scientific standards for validity or reliability. But it's the most popular and most widely used psychological instrument in the world. Right? That's the problem that I face.
Yes.
All right. So I only use valid and reliable instruments. So the data I get back is valid and reliable. And when people, when I share the behavioral analysis with them, say, "Wow, that's really accurate," or "Wow, I didn't really know that about me." I said, "Well, all the behavioral analyses are a mirror. And I'm just holding up a mirror. That's all they are." Okay?
Whether you want to see it or not.
Whether you want to see it or not.
Yeah.
All right? But now, all right, and when it comes to, like M&A advisory, private equity firms and succession planning, things like that, there's a certain degree of risk. Okay, with that, with a manager or management team. And so, like in an M&A situation, private equity situation, what are you really buying? Okay.
Yeah, intellectual property is an enormous part of that.
Yeah. Well, what are you really buying? I mean, you have you have the business, and every private equity firm has these really smart guys. But the fact is, the guy down the street with his private equity firm, he can add just as well as this guy.
Yes.
Okay. But what do you really know about the management team? Okay. And that becomes the stumbling block. So, what are you buying? And if you don't know what you're buying, well, are you really serving your investors? Okay? So, I'm basically able to tell them what the risk factor is with this management team.
It's interesting when you talk about the risk factor. One of the key tenets when you're looking is how do you de-risk a business from a buyer's eyes. And you go through and you say, well, here's the balance sheet, here's the contracts, here are all the standard items, balance sheet, and so on. And then you go, well, do you have a CEO? Is the business transferable? Is the owner of the business or not? And you're going in and go, okay, past that point, on the surface, you have a CEO. You can transition. You have all the C-suite filled out. I can look at all the other parts, but you're doing a qualitative analysis.
No, quantitative.
Quantitative analysis of the leadership team and looking for gaps and trying to de-risk that.
Well, just identify what the risks are. There's always risk.
Sure.
Right? But, depending on, what the market is and how valuable the product or service is, how tight the market is. And these are all things that the buyer or seller have a complete understanding of that I really don't know.
Yeah, and the M&A guys are pretty good at looking at that.
They're great at that.
There are some in specific niches, they know it really well. But I think about the aha moment when somebody goes through and says, okay, I got all that. I mean, it looks like everything else. And you go, but I got this management team. You go, is it a blue one, a red one, or a green one? Or what shade of that do I have?
Yeah.
And where's the gap? And if you have a gap in the leadership team, when you look at a highly quantitative analyzed team versus maybe a mid-level team, what do you think the multiple difference is on buy price between the two?
That's hard to tell because, like, within that 63%, I can get it closer to the 100%. But it has a lot to do with one, the quality of the product or service, the intensity of the competition within the marketplace, and then the talent of the manager and management teams themselves. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken crap, right? So if they're garbage,
Yeah,
I'll make them better. but it still may not be enough to to handle the the multiples that you bought this by, because they're all paying 10 to 15 times above a beta, right? And so they're under extreme pressure, right, to to get the returns for their for their investors.
When you're utilized by a private equity M&A firm first time, and you get done, what's the typical commentary by the private equity team after you come back and go, fellas and ladies?
Yeah. So we thought we'd take a flyer on you, and we had no idea this could be the result. That's But that's I've been in this for a long time, and it's really no different than sports. All right? I coached football for a long time, and you look for talent. It's a talent-based business, and if you don't have the horses, you're not going to win. Right? And again, it comes back to the strategy and the talent. But when you got when you have good talent, you have a really sound strategy, many times you still don't win. Okay, so what else is it? And so I go into what people would call the intangibles, and I make them tangible. Right? I identify them. I identify what those qualities are, and then I put a number next to it. And nobody else is doing that. So, and that's why they're intrigued by it, but most of them don't really believe in it, until they actually get into it. And then there's another phenomena afterwards. They're like, who really knows how much impact he had? But there's a causal relationship there. I mean, there's the relationship is really strong, because there's no other intervention being implemented.
And from a data guy, if you're a data guy, being able to go through and you go, what do you mean you can't quantify the differential because you brought the data forward?
Yeah. Well, I do a pre-test, then a post-test, and because performance is complex, and so there's no cause and effect. There's relationships, and all I say is that, just like in sports, in sports there's like 7 different ways to enhance performance, and I'll see if I can remember what they are: strategy, technique, conditioning, injury rehab, nutrition, and then psychology. I'm leaving something out. I said injury rehab. That's the one I usually forget. Strategy, technique. I forget that. But the fact is, you cannot separate the psychology from the strategy. Okay, and it's all basically what I do is I help people put those puzzles together, and my job is to basically make the client is the person who pays me, and that could be anybody. But the subject is the person I'm working with. What I'm trying to help them do is become aware of how they work best, because most people are either unaware or they think they know, but the reason why they end up pushing a rock up a hill. And when they get done with my program, not only are things easier, but they're performing at a much higher level. And it's just one of those things of, they would have gotten there at some point, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. All I do is expedite.
Well, I think about professional athletes have a team of coaches, and they go, do you want to spend you have a finite period of time in the athletic arena, and would you like to accelerate your progress or not? When you go into an organization, what's the typical pushback from the team that's in place at the company?
Everything's fine. And my response to that is, okay, if you're satisfied with mediocrity, I'm not your guy. But if you want to be great, then this is something that people who want to be great check out. But it basically comes down between a growth-oriented mindset and a fixed mindset. Is that, and Carol Dweck, a psychologist at Stanford, wrote a book maybe 10, 12 years ago called The Growth Mindset. And she basically explained everything that I've been talking about for the past 20 years. Is the only thing that I find as a profile attribute who's a suitable candidate is people who have a growth-oriented mindset. And people who have a fixed mindset basically say, well, I can't get any better. This is basically what it is. Right? And those people are going to, are going to be stuck in the sand. But people who have a growth mindset, they will continue to grow, and then they'll realize that even though, and admittedly, this is a different approach. It's a unique approach. But once you exhaust all your other options and you're still not making your numbers, or you're somewhat dissatisfied, or you have that growth-oriented mindset and you say, I wonder if I can still get better, that's when people usually give me a chance. But for the most part, there's going to, one guy is going out on a limb and says, yeah, I want to bring him in. But then there's 2 or 3 others who are looking kind of sideways and go, okay, if you want to do this, go right ahead.
I think about doing what you did, will get you where you are. Mm-hmm. And you go, so it reminds me of the SCurve. You plateau at some point.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, so if we kept doing it the same way, we're going to keep getting a similar outcome.
If you always do what you've always done, you're always
going to get what you got.
Always got.
And you think about, how do you take and adjust that mindset? And it's a willingness to go, I don't have the answers, all of them. Mm-hmm. And I'm willing to hear some hard truth. Mm-hmm. And I think about as you go in and you do, circling back, when you're working with the military and so on, and using this tool, mm-hmm. assessing whether it was cadets or, military spec ops teams or whatever, mm-hmm. Were you surprised at some of the outcomes that you found when you were doing the assessments?
No, not when I was doing the assessments, but as far as the results, when cadets started doing better academically, that was the wait what moment. Like, oh, okay, they improved their GPA by a full letter grade, and I really never talked to them about academics. They just applied what we talked about, within their sport, and they just applied it on their own. But then the cadets started coming to me, either when they were about to graduate or after graduation. And this is not a middle management program. Okay, mm-hmm. This is for people who really want to be great. Mm-hmm. And these guys wanted to be commandos in the special forces, or they wanted to be F-16 pilots. And so they would call me and say, hey doc, I'm in this program and it seems like I plateaued, and what do you got for me? And we would just talk about situations. And that the academy experience, and before that I was the director of the Peak Performance Clinic at the University of Kansas, and I had some similar results, but I wasn't there long enough to really build a body like mm-hmm. I did at the academy. But it was similar, is that not only academics and athletic performance, but also relationships, right? And things like that where we're just getting better. They were just managing themselves. There's self-management, and then there's relationship management. And one of the things I learned was that if you want to lead and manage others, you have to first lead and manage yourself. So, but the cadets, who then became second lieutenants, you have to understand everything that my programs at the Air Force Academy inside the Human Performance Lab were all voluntary. Mm-hmm. And you being former military, understand that just about everything in the military is mandatory. All right? So I just, the first thing I would start out with was team seminars. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to show up. Maybe the coach, mandated it, but I didn't. Mm-hmm. If they wanted to get up and leave, they could get up and leave. Right?
And I think about that pre-qualifies the crowd. They're motivated to change, and so if they're a volunteer, they show up.
Yeah, but also within a crowd, if you get that negative energy out, it really helps. So if you don't want to get better, I really don't want to work. I don't want you around. Right?
Well, we were talking about that, and so you've got this group of volunteers, right? Mm-hmm. And there's always a turd in the punch bowl. There's always one.
Yeah, sometimes they're at the top.
Yeah. And so you look at that, and so you've got that group dynamic, whether you're in a military group or you're in up at the academy. Mm-hmm. What do you do to try to take and either mitigate or move that particular?
Oh, I don't do anything. No, they deselect.
They deselect?
Yeah, they deselect. It's not part of their value system.
Yes.
Okay? This is just something else I have to do. So
unwilling to change.
Yeah, unwilling to change, and there was a gal. She was a soccer player, and she loved soccer. She was best player on the team. And I was just outside watching practice, and she comes up to me after the coach dismisses him. She goes, "Doc, I need to see you." And I can see the tears in her eyes. And she was just going through all kinds of change. She just got engaged. She didn't take enough credits her sophomore year, so she was overloaded on her senior year. And for the people out there, the military academies are really hard. I mean, I'm a state school guy, and I went to some good schools, but nothing like the service academies. And even the Ivy Leagues can't compare to this. Okay, it's really hard. I mean, the military experience is hard. The athletic, they're trying to compete as Division I athletes, and really,
and they have to keep their grades up, and most of
not only keep their grades up, but they're taking really hard classes. There's no gut classes. I mean, even for humanity majors, they still have to take engineering classes.
Yes.
All right. So it's really hard, and not only that, as far as keeping the grades up, but they take 21 credit hours a semester on average. They graduate with 164 credits. Right, where BS and a BA out of state, every other school is 124, 128
they think
credits.
15 hours a quarter is a load.
15 credits for the cadets is so light, it's ridiculous. Yeah. Right, so this gal, she was taking like 24 credit hours. Okay, and she's engaged, and then her family, which was military, just moved overseas, so she lost that support system, and this was before Skype. Right, so she didn't really have that, and all she could think of is, what am I going to do when we graduate, and how much, we're not going to have any money. I mean, all parts of her value system was in just complete disarray. Right? Well, I just put her through an exercise, and she really took to it, and because the only option she saw was to quit soccer. That was the only option, and it's everybody at the academy is on scholarship. So if you quit a sport, you don't lose anything.
Yeah.
All right. But she loves soccer, so that was the conflict that she was facing. And I just put her through this exercise, and things just became much more clearer to her. Right? And then, she ends up, becoming she was the first athlete, female athlete in the Academy's history to be named all-conference to a Division I conference, because the year before they were Division II. It was the first year they moved to Division I. I mean, she was a really good player, and she loved the game, but she just didn't know how to manage her life with all the change that was going on. So, the service academies are just really difficult, and when it comes to working with people, and when you work with athletes, you want to help them achieve their dreams, and it's great when they do achieve their dreams. But it's a zero-sum game, because if the team you're working with doesn't win, somebody else wins.
Mm-hmm. Okay? Every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? But in business, it's different. Business, if the company goes south, it doesn't mean somebody else is really doing a whole lot better. But there's a whole company of people who just lost their jobs,
families and children and lifestyle.
Right, and so that degree of risk is really, is significant. But there's nothing that compared to the F-16 pilots and the commandos that I worked with.
Well, it's you make a boo-boo, somebody really suffers or dies.
Exactly, and as you probably know, there's two ways to evaluate the mission.
Done or not done.
Done or not done, and then did you come home?
Yes.
Right, and all the people I work with came home, and they all accomplished their mission, and that is something I'm really proud of, because that's nobody. I don't know of anybody else who had that degree of responsibility when working with people to enhance their performance, because there's always risk involved, and where is that line? Where is that judgment? And that's really what the model results in.
For the commander, right? And the commander's got to take and assign a task to be done. Mm-hmm. All right, and so you look at as a commander, you really don't want to take somebody out in a poorly planned mission where you have casualties involved.
Yeah.
And so I think about the responsibility of the person tasking the spec ops units to perform a mission. And, and you think about did I make the right decision? Did I take and consider all the factors? So for back to the soccer player, what was the aha or pivot for her? What do you think was the pivot?
There's really not a whole lot of aha.
Yeah.
No client has ever came to me and said, well, that was the aha moment. But a pivot, yes, is that she just saw her life in a much different way. Is that she could include soccer and still get, do the 24 or 27 hours that she was working on. She was engaged, which means it's a period of moving the boyfriend from the social life to the family life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And she realized that wasn't really her job. That was really up to her parents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That they were going to have to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so she just had a greater sense of what was in control. And the financial aspect was pretty obvious. Is that one of the things she talked about was going to the academy. You're in a dorm for 4 years, and you don't have that opportunity to live off campus and build up some furniture and some things like that. And I was like, well, I don't know how much second lieutenants make, but as 2 second lieutenants, do you think you can make rent?
I can tell you, as a second lieutenant, when I was in back in the dark ages, I made $7,000 a year.
But could you make rent? Could you, could you afford an apartment?
That and peanut butter jellies and a 911.
Okay. All right. But if you were married with somebody else,
most of them, it was really tight.
Yeah. Well,
it was
I think
really
from what I understand, back in the '90s, they were making like 35 or 45 grand.
Yeah.
All right. So with a dual income of 70 to 90 grand.
Yes.
They were fine.
Yes.
And once you realized that, it was like, oh, okay, money's not going to be a problem. No, money's not going to be a problem, right? I mean, how to be honest with you, how else are you going to get people to come to the service, come to the service academy, unless you pay them something to come out? So, with a guaranteed job. So that was, once she started putting these things together and all these things that she was worrying about, they just kind of dissipated just by her writing out in the exercise. Because when she came in the next day, she had the paper and she handed it. She said, no, I don't need to read it. Tell me, what did you learn? And she told me what she learned. And I said, okay, so what's your decision? She said, I'm going to stick with soccer. I'm going to do this. I'm going to, I made a mistake sophomore year by only taking 15 to 18 credits, and I'm just going to do it this year. But that's that's the hard part. But I'm a senior. I know how this place works, so I'll get through it. It's not going to be fun, right? But the academies are not fun anyway. So then she was able to, and what I always try to convey to the cadets is that at every other school, right, this is where your competitive advantage comes in, because they came up with every excuse why they couldn't compete, right? And I just turned every one of those around, and I said, look at the other schools, and what do you think their toughest part of the day is? You think it's classes? No. The hardest part of the day is practice. What's the best part of your day?
Practice.
Best part of my day is practice. And what's the best part about being on the team? Ramps, right? They didn't have to eat with the squad, right? They could eat as a team. Tell me about the second best thing. Oh, the travel. I get to leave the academy. Mm-hmm. Okay? Right? So, away games were great. Mm-hmm. Right? Where every other team is looking, oh, we got to go to an away game. Mm-hmm. Right? So the whole,
it's framing, isn't it?
It's framing. It's all about perspective.
We're kind of going through some of the topics here and jumping around a bit, and we're completely off script, which is awesome, which is what I like. So and we're talking about potential, and maybe it was the young lady that was a soccer player or any of the teams. Mm-hmm. And so when you go in and you're trying to analyze potential, what system or what steps, what do you do to try to take and assess potential?
Well, I don't try to assess potential. All right? Mm-hmm. We know 3 things about potential. We can't measure it, we can't predict it, and nobody's ever maximized it. Mm-hmm. So, the talent management people, they're all trying to identify potential. Good luck with that. Okay?
Tom Brady, right?
Yeah, he's an example, but also Peyton Manning.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And then Ryan Leaf. Okay? And to use the sports terms, but GPAs. Mm-hmm. Okay? What do you think is the best predictor of success for a high school student?
Probably work ethic. Anything else?
It's not GPA, is it?
Well, no. The old axiom, right, is all the A students end up working for all the C students.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not GPA. It's not class rank. And it's certainly not SAT and ACT scores. Okay,
True.
all right. What researchers have found is that it's leadership and participation of extracurricular activities.
You know, it's funny. I was talking to an NFL agent, and he said predictor of durability in the NFL is multiple sports played during college, not just one. And said that really is more of a predictor of durability than anything.
Yeah, that's why in youth sports specialization is the worst thing you could do to a kid. Because they're always working the same joints, they're always working the same part of the body, and they don't get enough time to recover.
Well, Gretzky. Didn't Gretzky play baseball and some other stuff before he played hockey? I think it was.
Most do.
Yeah.
All right, but you also build unique social skills because instead of just hanging out with your with your specialized friends, you're developing relationships in other teams. So.
Well, no wonder I did so well. I couldn't play any sport well. And I moved every year, so I had to survive.
Yeah, exactly. Those social skills are really important. That's something you and I have in common because until I went to college, and it was the college I transferred into, I never went to a school for more than 2 years straight.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah. It's the old application problem. Where did you go to school? And you go, I need another piece of paper.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay, though.
For looking at your model, and we were talking about key features that changes behavior and changes performance for the CEO or the C-suite crowd. What can we look forward to on the features that you bring to the table?
Well, again, I stay in my lane. It's all about strategic execution. So there are a lot of parts to leadership, and I understand that, and they're all important. But I just focus on the strategic execution component. Is that if you have a leader who has trouble executing the strategy, one, because they don't manage themselves very well, or two, they don't relate to others very well, or they don't learn enough, or they don't have the right ambition. These are all factors within my model.
Yeah, they got to be able to do.
Yeah, I grew up as a football coach, and as a college football coach, and one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that when you get fired, you have to walk home, because there's a courtesy car. And that a car dealer just gave you, and they're not going to let you keep it.
Yeah, it's a performance job.
It's a performance job, right? And so I was conditioned in that manner. And so the ability for people, whether it's football players or CEOs or the bakers, to execute the strategy is paramount, right? And this is one of the biggest misunderstandings about team cohesion and what good leadership is and can you rally people. When you get inside a locker room, in a high level college football or an NFL locker room, they don't care about that. They just want to know if you can play. Okay? And it's the same thing in the C-suite. They really don't care about your personality. They really don't care about what your political leanings are, and all this other stuff that a lot of social psychologists will get into. It just comes down to performance. Can you deliver the numbers? Okay? Because that's what we're here for. Right? First and foremost, and through that, and team cohesion has never been a predictor of performance. Okay? But the value of performing, the value of executing the strategy, when you share that, that's when people start to bond.
How many teams and organizations do you think you've been in front of during your career?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's
a bunch.
Yeah, lots.
When you go in, I mean, how many times are you surprised? Can you, when you go in and go, I think it's going to be this thing or that thing, can you pick up on that pretty quick?
No.
Got to dig deep to find it.
I need the data. And what I learn about the data is that all the answers are in the data. And where I spend most of my time, Bob, once I get the data and I put together the behavioral analysis and then I just keep rewriting them, all the answers are in the data because the data comes from the manager. And they tell me everything I need to know. It's just a matter of finding it and just keep looking at it. Just all the answers are in the data.
On many of the management teams, when you present the data and the findings from the data,
Mm-hmm.
are they often surprised?
Yeah, because there's blind spots.
Uh-huh.
And people don't see their blind spots, but they certainly agree with their strengths.
Yeah, that's
All right?
yeah, my good.
And for the most part, a lot of their weaknesses, you haven't told that before.
You know, it's funny, isn't it? When you go, yeah, I'm either a visionary and an executor.
Mm-hmm.
One or the other, kind of.
Well, one of the behavioral analysis, I call it the executive presence report. It measures their managerial tendencies, and it measured on time and focus. And the time can be either present or future, and the focus can be on the organization or the individual. And it shows 4 different tendencies. One is the executor, one is the strategist, one is the team builder, and one is the recruiter. And they're going to skew one way or the other, and that's fine. And if it's a really low middle market firm, like 1 to 2 million in valuation, then it's just one person driving performance.
Mm-hmm.
If 1 or 2 of those areas are dormant, that will show why they're not executing strategy to the to the utmost. But within a management team, what you're really looking for, and I'll go into a little bit of the analysis if you like, but with this analysis, it's kind of like a baseball team.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want 3 catchers and a shortstop. All right? You don't want 3 strategists and an executor. All right? You want all 4 of those to be represented within your management team. And when they're not, when they are skewed, that will explain why strategy isn't being executed consistently. Another one is what I call the leadership execution analysis. Details 7 different factors of individual execution. And to use the baseball analogy again, is you want everybody to hit.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to have a balance here. All right? You want everybody to hit, and I score them on a 5-point scale, 0 to +2, longitudinally, so it looks kind of like a balance sheet. Anything on the left is bad, everything on the right is good. You want everybody on the right.
Mm-hmm.
All right? And when people are on the left, that's not good. And that explains why strategy isn't being executed.
And then from your systems in work, can you move them from left to right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a 1-score improvement is good. People who score a 2-score improvement, that is exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
That means they put a lot of work into it. So, and the correlation is when they make that move, they make more money. That's basically
just good business.
Yeah, it's just good.
I think about the first generation trying to pass a business to the second generation, and they have, the people that have been there with them from first generation biz. Then you have the siblings or children coming up through the business. Do you get called into those situations?
I haven't been called into a family situation, but I was having called into succession plans.
Uh-huh.
And they're just looking for a person, who can execute the strategy, and that means they're looking for somebody who can who may have a strategy. But I don't get into that. But it's nice to have a strategy. But if you can't execute it, it's no different than the paintings on the walls here. It's just
it's nice.
It's just a piece of art.
Yeah.
And you can appreciate it, but if you can't execute it, what
Yeah,
good is it?
I have this really great plan.
Good for you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I have a
Terrific.
great plan. Good. Did you do anything about it? No.
Well, I did, but this happened or that happened,
Yeah.
and they come up with all kinds of excuses about why it didn't.
The market,
really,
the competitors,
and
the
that's
environment.
why the strategies only deliver 63% of what they promise. But then when you add that on top of somebody who doesn't execute very well, the percentages go way down, and leading to the strategy execution paradox. So what do which lever you got to pull? You're the chairman. What are you going to do?
Got to do something.
You're going to have to do
Or
something.
somebody's going to help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact is, you don't know. You may think you know, but you don't know.
Well, I think about you're the new CEO coming into an organization, right? And you got your existing team, and you're trying to figure out what you got as far as players and so on. And there may be somebody that you would dictate a task to accomplish. And if they're a non-executor, but they're a big-time visionary, that's not going to get done, is it?
No, but the visionary can develop execution skills. Anybody can develop execution skills, and my model has been described as simple but robust.
I like simple.
I like simple too, and it's just one thing. And the fact is, any 12-year-old can master these skills, right? But people who fail to to pay attention to these things, whether they're captains of industry or leaders of nations, it's been their downfall. Right? And so I'm sure you've heard the term emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very important concept.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what I'm onto is something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it's called executive functioning, and emotional intelligence is a subset of executive functioning. And it really has to do with the brain and where people are, what part of the brain is actually being exercised when they're making decisions and conveying judgments.
Mm-hmm. And
when they're not working from the neocortex, if they're working from the lizard brain,
mm-hmm.
right, the fight or flight, the survival center, this is where decisions are being dictated by emotions, and that's never a good thing. It's okay to be emotional, but your decisions should dictate what your emotions are. This is a situation where I need to be angry. This is a situation where I need to be extremely joyful and grateful. Right? This is a situation where I really need to be extremely excited. Right? Not that they're it's basically a difference between I'm looking right over there, and I see a thermostat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And are you a thermostat or are you a thermometer?
Mm-hmm.
A thermostat controls the environment. A thermometer reacts to the environment. Right? Great leaders are thermostats.
There was a study done by some guys I know out of the West Coast, and they were talking about characteristics of billionaires and their reaction to stress.
Mm-hmm.
And the measured, thoughtful, time, not time to get excited.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an ER physician.
Mm-hmm.
If you run in the ER and he goes, "Oh my God, you're bleeding,"
mm-hmm.
wrong guy, wrong place.
Yeah. Well, it's like, what they understand is the same thing as fighter pilots, as commandos, as high-level athletes, is when things get tight, they slow down.
Think, execute, muscle memory, discipline, procedure,
there's
training, the whole bit.
All right? And that takes a tremendous amount of executive functioning, and that's where I get people to work from more than they used to. That's really the only difference in the before and after.
Mm-hmm.
But to get there, you need a lot of data to figure it out, to see what their trigger points are, to figure out which strengths to leverage, and then which weaknesses and blind spots you gotta improve upon as far as what their own obstacles are. But when they start working from working from the executive functioning more than the survival center, that's when their potential is going to be maximized. So I don't really care what their potential is. My model is based on what is the mindset, what is the belief system that enables people to maximize their potential, to execute strategy consistently to the best of their ability.
Two things come to mind. One, we're busy talking, and the listeners going like, "Well, how do I find you?" So, how do they find you on social media?
Okay. This is always a
This is
challenge.
the quiz.
Yeah, this is always a challenge. All right, so the website is motereconsulting.com. That's MOTERE.
Mm-hmm.
Then the email is steve.long@motereconsulting.com. LinkedIn is Stephen with a PH .long 24, and then Twitter is SteveLong24.
Yes, yeah. And the things I guess that was, I warn you out on quizzing, which is almost completely off script. I guess to close out here, maybe an example war story of a before and after, where you go into an organization or whatever you do, and the key takeaways from before and after. Your story.
I'm trying to. I did finish the CEO succession story. So let me find another one. There was a small business.
Mm-hmm.
It was an executive search firm, and I was brought in to work with some underachievers
Mm-hmm.
who used to be high performers, but for whatever reason they've bottomed out. And so I worked with them and got them back to a not the highest level, but in that second cluster.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so then I went to the owners and I said, well, I appreciate the opportunity to work with the low performers, but why don't you give me a shot at your top four?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because what I learned, primarily through athletics, is that nobody really cares if you have the best scout team in the country.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Is that to be a force multiplier, and that's a military term,
Mm-hmm.
okay? To be a force multiplier, you really got to get the top people involved, okay? And so because of the success with the low performers, then they gave me a shot at the top four. And that's when things, that's when the roof was just
That's
blown
leverage.
off. Okay?
Yeah.
Is that they broke monthly, quarterly, and yearly revenue records by a significant amount. And what a lot of people don't understand is that most performance is all based on a bell curve, right? Is that you got your 70% in the middle who win some, who lose some, right? And to take an athletic example, most coaches are 70% of them are in that area. They're about 500. They might have a couple of good years, might have a couple of bad years, but pretty much they're 500. And then the people on the bottom of the bell curve, they don't last very long.
They move a lot.
They move a lot, and then they don't stay as the head coach very long.
Yeah.
Okay? But then people at the top end, they win a lot. Okay? So, but how do you move that needle? And the biggest mistake I see in business is that they try to go uphill. They try to take their lowest performers and just make them mediocre. Okay? And that's you're pushing a rock up a hill there. That's hard work. But if you take the top performers and you make them better, what people don't understand is that those mediocre performers will always be mediocre in relation to the top performers. Once they see the top performers taking off, they feel an internal, most of the time it's subconscious, but sometimes it's conscious, a subconscious or a conscious pressure to say, I better get moving.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the top performers are moving and I got to stay at least average in relation to them. That's how you move the needle. You take your best performers and you make them even better. And you're not going to do that through IT. You're not going to do that through a change transformation program. Right? It's only going to happen through programs like this. Right? Is that you make your best even better, and that puts a pressure on the middle, and they start to get better. And then the bottom guys, they may or may not come along, but that's where Jack Welch says that's where you cut the tail off.
I think about the top performers, and so you're in, and there's a group of guys, gals, that are absolutely stellar at what they do,
Mm-hmm.
and yet there's a barrier to go to whatever the next level is for them. What do you typically see as their barrier to the next level?
It ranges. It all depends upon the person, and that's why all the answers are in the data. There's no assumptions I can make.
Okay.
Is that they come in with a clean slate, they are who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just that's why they're in control in an executive coaching kind of situation. When I do workshops, it's a little bit more broad based, but I still have the data
Mm-hmm.
on them, and I can tailor my teaching to them. And depending on the size of the audience, I can really target specific issues. But it's futile.
Is there a predominant characteristic blind spot of a top producer? If you were to skew your bell curve of all your data,
No.
spread across the spectrum.
No, they have all kinds of issues.
Mm-hmm.
And, so, like this one client I just started working with actually tested very well, accepted my test. And what shows is that his mental toughness scores were exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually the toughest skill to master, is dealing with frustration, right? Overcoming adversity. But his other scores weren't all that good. So I asked him, so where did you learn that? And he's a BYU grad, and he was sent to Sweden for his mission. And first he learned the language, and then he gets over there and realized that 90% of the people over there speak English. Okay?
We loaded it up and shot in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's like a really hard language to learn. But then, he's asked to, basically build a congregation.
Uh-huh.
And in Sweden, religion is not a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
So he got mostly rejection. So he learned, how to deal with rejection, how to deal with failure through that experience. And, like when I was working with athletes, golfers in particular, the elite golfers, they're used to being, in the middle of the fairway, right? But for hacks like me, it's no big thing to be in the woods. Just go find your ball and hack it out.
That's why I hunt.
Yeah,
because I spend all my time in the woods.
In the woods, exactly.
Yeah.
But these elite golfers, when they get into the woods or even to the rough, they're like, oh, what do I do with this? They have no idea how to adapt.
Yep.
Okay, so basically, the ability to learn, the ability to adapt. Those are the key features of the model.
I think about, as you're talking, so you have this broad range of strengths and weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And, and so I go through and I've got my assessment, and I'm good in the blue and not good in the red, but red's critical for me for success. Mm-hmm. Then for you, are you able to take and teach and or provide tools or techniques or...
Yeah, that's really the value of the program, is that there's a lot of data companies out there, mm-hmm. and they'll tell you what's wrong, and they'll tell you what's right.
Yeah.
But here you go. There's a commercial.
Here you go.
Yeah, there's a commercial out there now, like the guy's in a dentist chair, and the guy is showing him that he has 3 or 4 cavities. He said, "Well, no, I'm just a dental technician. I can't really fix that." And so my job, at Kansas and at Air Force was to enhance the performance of the cadet and student athletes. Okay, so the most important thing I have, people get really fixated on the analysis because it's tangible. Mm-hmm. Okay, but by far the most important thing is the catalog of educational strategies and counseling techniques I have. Is that basically I'm changing their belief system. Okay, I'm changing how they think, and that's the magic trick. So when I change that, they see the problem in a completely different manner. The problem doesn't go away. They just see it in a different way, so they can attack it in a different way.
They learn tools and mechanisms.
Exactly.
There was a book.
They learn how to think. That's basically what it comes down to, because we're not taught. Our educational system does not teach people how to think. All right. But that's where, and I'm kind of grateful for that, because it provides me with a rewarding profession that I don't have to be on a campus for.
I think about we were talking before the show that you're coming into a creative period where you're going to start doing some work, mm-hmm. and there'll be some publications where you're actually working with some elite athletes, and in various disciplines and so on. So that'll be coming up in the future for you. I think about the feedback loop, mm-hmm. just from the podcast, where I talk to really bright people on a regular basis, and you go, I get tutored effectively, mm-hmm. by CEOs and business owners and the folks that work with them every week.
Yeah.
And it's the unanticipated benefit,
the unintended consequences,
things you wouldn't think of when you started.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, why is that person mm-hmm. so unique in this one area? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure for you, as you go through your career and you get continual feedback, you
that got my attention first at Kansas and then at Air Forces when the athletes were using this not only for athletic performance but then academic performance. And then at the academy, people who were not athletes, who were looking to be, to win postgraduate scholarships, they were coming to see me. But the relationship part of it really surprised me. One gal got engaged. She came to me and says, swim season was over, and she says, "Well, I want to get engaged." I was like, "Okay." And then I ran into her at the end of the semester. We ran into each other, jogging on the base. And I said, "So what's going on?" She goes, and she showed me her ring finger. I was like, "Whoa."
Task oriented.
Yeah, that kind of, initially it scared me. But then I worked with a fellow who whose wife was diagnosed with brain cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in a business, he was a full commission business. And he hadn't made any money for 18 months. All right? And he had 2 small children. All right? This is, it's not as serious as the Commandos and the F-16s,
yeah.
But it's serious,
yeah.
And he was able to turn things around. Those are the unintended consequences. A cadet that I worked with, who was a boxer,
mm-hmm.
and he ended up into the national tournament when he didn't really qualify. He only got in because somebody didn't. They realized that he didn't have the grades, or he actually wasn't even a student. So they had to toss him out of the tournament. And he just came into it and he says, "How can I expect to win if I didn't even qualify?" And I just said, you put the burden of proof on the other guy. Just go out there and box, all right? And then he actually ended up cross commissioning into the Marines as Special Forces.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I get emotional about this. One day I get a letter, and this is after I left the academy. I get a letter, and it's handwritten, but there's no return address. It's just kind of sketchy, to be honest with you. But I open it up, and it's this guy, and he starts telling me that he's being deployed to Afghanistan, and he's got 30 people underneath him. Mm-hmm. All right, and I says, "I'm just going to put the burden of proof on them." I was like, "Okay." Right? And then like a year and a half later, I get a phone call. It's him. He says, "Hey, Doc, I just want to let you know, we put the burden of proof on them, and we all came home."
That's and you look at that and you go pebble in the pond stuff in those days.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, well, that's not exactly what I thought would happen.
I didn't know, no.
And I think so much of that stuff, when you function as a mentor for some description, you never really know. Yeah. And then sometimes out of the blue, somebody will come back and you go, well, that's not exactly where I saw that going.
Yeah. I mean, he ended up winning the national championship in boxing. Mm-hmm. Right? And the lessons you learn from these extracurriculars, it's just not sports, but it's drama and debate and,
I think
all of them. And this guy just applied it to whatever else he was doing, and then, applied
it's a tool.
It is a tool.
It's a tool.
It's like a tool, anything else that we gather as we go mm-hmm. through life, but where else can you get it? That's the thing. And then where else can you measure it, and how do you know you actually did something with it? That's that's the part that I don't understand with my competitors. All right? And this is what you get, and this is what you'll see who you are, and then you'll get all this other stuff, and then you'll improve your performance. But you can improve, you can apply it to just about anything. It's up to you. I'm being brought in to help you execute the strategy in this business. That's the practical application. But wherever else you want to apply it, you go right ahead.
Mm-hmm. It's a framework.
Yeah.
It's a framework.
Yeah, it's universally applied.
Well, with that being said, I have harassed you for quite some time, which is a plus. But, I would say to the folks listening, I said, if you're in doubt or you really don't know, the worst thing you can do is not reach out. And so make sure that they reach out to you and at least say, can you help me, or how does this work? Mm-hmm. And so, Steve, I really appreciate you coming in. This has been really, we didn't We didn't do anything off the script to speak of.
That's fine.
Which is exactly how I like them to go.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate it sincerely, and folks reach out to him, and we look for good things.
Well, I appreciate your interest, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Absolutely.